So if you pick up a game controller right now, even if you haven't played a 3D platformer since like the late 90s, I bet your thumb instinctively knows the rhythm.
Oh, completely. That double jump.
Exactly. The double jump and then the glide. It's this visceral, retained physical memory. Your brain just sort of anticipates the digital gravity before you even fully register the screen.
It's basically hardwired into an entire generation of players.
Yeah, and we are really tapping into that incredibly specific feeling today. Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. We have a major announcement that just rolled out of the Xbox Game Showcase.
A really surprising one, too.
Right. We've been looking at a whole stack of sources, press releases, the showcase footage, some really revealing interviews, and it's all detailing the return of Spyro, A Realm Beyond.
Coming in spring 2027, which is huge.
It is. I mean, it's the first entirely original title for the Purple Dragon since, 2008? But our mission today is to look past just the surface-level nostalgia.
Yeah, because it's so easy to just say, oh, look, a 90s mascot is back.
Right.
But the sources reveal a much richer narrative here.
Right.
We are using this specific release to kind of examine the evolution of traversal mechanics and, honestly, the frankly unforgiving demographic math of rebooting a legacy franchise.
Which we will definitely get into. That math is brutal.
It really is. Plus, there's this very deliberate tonal shift happening here that exposes a glaring gap in the broader modern gaming industry.
So I want to start with just the sheer technical ambition laid out in these showcase notes.
Yeah.
Because it immediately signals that this isn't just a cheap retro throwback,
Right, they're going big.
They're launching on Xbox, PlayStation 5, PC, and notably the Nintendo Switch 2.
Which is a formidable technical challenge.
Yeah. To me, that list isn't just marketing copy. It tells us they are building a game that scales from, like, super high-end rigs all the way down to portable hardware.
And that's tough when you look at what they're actually trying to achieve on screen.
Exactly. I mean, they brought back Tom Kenny to voice Spyro. The character has his signature quiff. The visual identity is totally intact. But when you read the interview with creative director Lou Studdard, the physical act of playing this game, it's totally different.
Yeah, it's undergoing a profound transformation. The shift in traversal is, it's fundamental to understanding what this game even is.
Break that down a bit for us.
So Studdard details how the core movement has been completely re-engineered. Think back to those original classic titles. You were dealing with very limited verticality.
Right, it was mostly horizontal.
Yeah, Spyro could jump, and he could glide from a high point to a lower point. The design was heavily constrained by the tech of the time. But in A Realm Beyond, Studdard explains that players can actually take flight at any moment.
Wow.
They are, and I'm quoting him here, leaning into the true capabilities of being a dragon.
Okay, the analogy I keep thinking of, it's like the difference between a dart and a drone.
Oh, I like that.
Because in the classic games, gliding was essentially falling with style. You jumped off a cliff, you were the dart, and gravity was always going to win.
You were just trying to stretch out the distance before you inevitably hit the floor.
Exactly. But what Studdard is describing sounds more like piloting a dynamic-powered glider. You aren't just fighting gravity anymore.
Right, you're actively reading the environment to sustain altitude.
Yeah, he talks about diving to build kinetic speed. And this is the crazy part, using your fire breath to ignite campfires scattered across the map.
Which generate thermal updrafts.
Yes, and if you fly into them, you get the lift needed to keep going.
But, how exactly does that change the fundamental design of a level?
Well, it changes everything. It completely shifts the balance of player agency.
How so?
Think about a vintage platformer. The developer dictates your exact path. They place a gap, they place a moving platform, and your job is basically to execute the correct sequence of button presses to survive their obstacle course.
Right, you're just reacting. Exactly. But when you introduce true dynamic flight powered by the environment, the level ceases to be a corridor. It becomes a volumetric puzzle.
So you are basically painting your own path through the air.
Precisely. You're scanning the horizon, you spot a campfire, you decide to dive toward it to gain speed.
And then you time your fire breath.
Right. You time the breath, catch the updraft, and vault over a mountain. You are manipulating the physics of the world. The player is no longer just surviving the environment, they are exploiting it.
Man, the level design has to open up dramatically to accommodate that kind of freedom.
It does. They have to build spaces that reward kinetic momentum rather than just precision jumping.
But, building a physics-based, momentum-driven open world, that requires an incredible amount of iteration. And risk.
A lot of risk.
You can't just mandate that kind of fluid mechanics on a rigid corporate spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Which leads us to the business side of our sources.
Which is arguably the most surprising part of this whole announcement.
It really is. Let's trace the intellectual property lineage here for a second. Insomniac Games built the 90s originals.
Yeah.
Then they moved on.
Right, to Ratchet and Clank and now Marvel stuff.
Exactly. So the IP eventually lands with a California studio called Toys for Bob, operating under the massive umbrella of Activision.
And their tenure under Activision is defined largely by the 2010s. Toys for Bob took the Spyro universe and spun it off into Skylanders.
Oh, right. The toys-to-life craze.
Yeah, a multi-billion-dollar phenomenon. Purchasing physical plastic action figures unlocked those specific characters inside the digital game.
I remember kids going crazy for those.
Huge. And then they later returned to the source material to build the Spyro Reignited trilogy in 2018.
Which was a really well-received remake.
Beautifully crafted. A ground-up remake of the first 3 games. So they really possess this intimate historical knowledge of the character's digital soul.
Right. But the plot twist in our sources today is that Toys for Bob is no longer a subsidiary of Activision.
Nope. They spun out.
They are now a fully independent studio and Spyro. A Realm Beyond is an independent venture. Now, I have to say, the prevailing internet narrative always cheers for the indie studio breaking free from the giant publisher.
It's a great underdog story.
It is. But I have a hard time buying the romance of it, to be honest.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Where does your skepticism come from?
Well, look at it pragmatically.
Mm-hmm.
If you are operating under Activision, you have access to a bottomless marketing budget, infinite technical resources.
That's true.
When you go indie, especially making a AAA scale multi-platform game for 2027, that financial safety net just vanishes.
It's definitely a high-wire act.
Right. And Paul Yan, the longtime studio boss, gave this interview where he claims independence allows them to return to the kinds of welcoming, whimsical games they are most passionate about.
Yeah, he says they want to be artisans of positive, handcrafted experiences.
But doesn't the terrifying reality of keeping an independent studio solvent force you to be, like, more commercially risk-averse? How does losing your funding actually make the art better?
That is a very fair question, but it forces us to examine how the Activision era actually functioned day-to-day for Toys for Bob.
Okay, what was it like?
Well, when a studio is producing a toys-to-life franchise like Skylanders, their digital development cycle is entirely subordinate to international plastics manufacturing.
Oh, wait. Because they have to physically ship the toys?
Yes. To Walmart, to Target, everywhere.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about that.
The molds for the plastic figures have to be finalized, manufactured in overseas factories, shipped on cargo boats, and placed on retail shelves by a hard, unmoving holiday deadline.
That's insane.
So if the creative director decides in July that a character's jump mechanic needs tweaking, it is too late. The physical toy is already locked.
And the digital game must hit the shelves the day the toys do.
Exactly. That kind of rigid, physically constrained pipeline actively suffocates mechanical iteration.
Okay, the supply chain aspect makes total sense. The tail was literally wagging the dragon.
Yes, exactly. So when Paul Yan talks about a return to handcrafted games, he is drawing a direct contrast to that era of mass-produced, factory-dictated development.
Got it.
Independence removes the manufacturing pipeline from the equation entirely.
Meaning they have actual time.
Right. If Lou Studdert needs an extra 3 months to make sure the thermal updraft physics feel perfectly satisfying to play, the studio can make that call without worrying about 500,000 plastic figures gathering dust in a warehouse somewhere.
Wow. So they are trading financial security for absolute creative agility.
That's exactly it.
Okay, well, that makes the artisan, quote, feel much more tangible. They aren't just talking about the art style. They're talking about the freedom to iterate on the literal feel of the game.
Which is everything for a platformer.
It is. But that brings us to the demographic math in our sources.
Yeah.
And it is undeniably brutal.
It's the uncomfortable truth of rebooting nostalgia.
Even with total creative freedom, an independent studio launching a game of this scale needs a monumental audience to break even. And the nostalgic audience they're targeting is, well, they're aging out.
The passage of time forces a very delicate, complex design challenge here.
Let's run the numbers from the data in the articles. The people who fell in love with the original PlayStation games in 1998, they are now firmly in their 30s or early 40s.
Right.
And the second wave of fans, the kids who discovered the character through Skylanders a decade ago, they are now in their 20s.
Yep.
So your built-in fan base consists entirely of adults with mortgages, yet you are making a game about a brightly colored, wisecracking purple dragon.
Which means your true target audience has to include actual 8-year-olds in 2027 who have never even heard of a PlayStation 1.
Right. So you have 3 distinct, totally disparate generations that all need to feel like this game was made specifically for them.
It's quite the needle to thread.
It reminds me of the tightrope Pixar has to walk with their films, you know?
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Because a modern Pixar movie has to deliver vibrant colors, kinetic animation, and physical comedy just to keep a theater full of 6-year-olds entertained.
But beneath that surface layer?
Yeah. The writers weave in these sophisticated emotional themes and nostalgic resonance specifically engineered to hit the misty-eyed parents who actually bought the tickets.
The parents are the ones with the wallets.
Right. And Toys for Bob has to do the video game equivalent of that. But instead of just sitting and watching for 2 hours, the audience has to actively interact with it for, like, 30 hours.
That Pixar analogy is incredibly fitting, particularly regarding this concept of friction in game design.
Friction, like difficulty.
Basically.
Yeah.
How do you design mechanics that satisfy the 35-year-old veteran while remaining accessible to the modern 8-year-old?
Right.
Paul Yan mentions their goal is to provide a welcoming entry point for all players and to appeal to the inner child in all gamers.
Which sounds great on a press release, but practically how do you execute that? Because let's be honest, nostalgia is a liar.
Oh, a massive liar.
The games we remember playing in 1998 were incredibly clunky.
The camera angles alone.
The camera angles were atrocious.
Yeah.
The hitboxes were unfair. The save systems were just punishing.
That is the core challenge. You cannot give the 35-year-old the game as it actually existed. You must give them the game as their inner child remembers it. The memory smooths out all the rough edges. This is why keeping Tom Kenny's voice and the specific visual quirks, like the quiff, are so vital.
They act as psychological anchors.
Exactly. They signal to the older player's brain, hey, you are home. This is the character you know.
So it's basically sleight of hand.
Very much so.
You use the familiar voice to distract them while you completely rip out and replace the engine underneath.
It is entirely sleight of hand. The underlying friction of the 90s is eradicated.
Replaced by the thermal updrafts and dynamic flight.
Right. The clunky jumping is replaced by a sophisticated, momentum-based physics system that modern children who have grown up on highly polished fluid games just expect as a baseline.
That's fascinating. So the older player perceives the game as classic and faithful, while the younger player experiences it as completely cutting edge.
Win-win.
But, bridging that generational gap through modern mechanics is one thing. Toys for Bob is attempting to bridge it through tone as well.
Yes, and this brings us to a really fascinating macro trend discussed in our sources.
The brightness deficit.
Brightness deficit, exactly. The developers are explicitly calling out a lack of joy in modern gaming.
Because if we rewind back to that original 1998 era,
yeah,
the landscape was saturated with 3D platformers.
Banjo-Kazooie, Crash Bandicoot, Mario 64.
Yeah. Colorful, bouncy, family-friendly adventures were the dominant commercial genre. Today, outside of Nintendo's very specific ecosystem, that genre has all but vanished from the AAA high-budget space.
It really has.
The contrast is stark, especially when you look at the trajectory of the original creators.
Yeah.
Insomniac Games, the studio that birthed this colorful, optimistic dragon, they're currently owned by Sony and developing Marvel's Wolverine.
Right. A title promising gritty, violent, mature action.
Meanwhile, Toys for Bob spins off into independence to bet literally everything on, as Paul Yan puts it, inspiring love, joy, and laughter.
He explicitly states, tonally, Spyro is something that the world needs very much.
I have to ask you, why did the rest of the industry abandon joy? It seems like such an obvious market to cater to.
Well, the industry's pivot toward dark, mature themes was driven by a combination of advancing technology and chasing that aging demographic we just discussed.
The 90s kids growing up.
Exactly. As the graphical capabilities of consoles grew exponentially, AAA studios felt immense pressure to justify their ballooning budgets.
And the eventual $70 price tags.
Right. The prevailing wisdom became that prestige and value were synonymous with cinematic Hollywood-style realism.
And realism in gaming usually means grim.
It translates to heavy, violent, or dystopian narratives. The color palette's literally desaturated over the last 15 years just to convey seriousness.
So they basically just followed the 90s kids as they grew up, assuming that because the audience had to pay taxes now, they only wanted to play games about morally ambiguous anti-heroes in the rain.
That was the assumption, yeah. But Paul Yan is challenging that very premise.
He thinks they're wrong.
He does. He is quoted in the showcase materials saying, "If the tide is turning and the trends are putting a spotlight on optimism and positivity, we're all for it." He is diagnosing a cultural exhaustion with relentless grimness.
He senses a shift in the wind.
A profound one. By launching a major multi-platform title built entirely around joyful experiences and handcrafted worlds, Toys for Bob is betting that adult gamers don't necessarily want their entertainment to mirror the heaviness of their adult lives.
Do you want an escape?
They might actually be craving the vibrant escapism they left behind in their childhoods, and they want to share that exact sensation with their own kids.
It's deliberate counter-programming to the entire prevailing aesthetic of modern high-budget gaming. But I will say, sustaining pure joy over a 20-hour game is remarkably difficult.
Oh, absolutely.
Like a gritty action game can rely on tension, fear, dramatic stakes to keep you engaged. If your primary emotion is just optimism, how do you prevent the player from just getting bored?
Well, it can't just be a pretty colorful world. The joy has to be baked into the kinetic action.
Which brings us full circle back to Lou Studdart's re-engineered flight mechanic.
Exactly. The joy cannot just be aesthetic, it must be mechanical. The act of diving, building speed, and igniting a campfire to catch a thermal updraft, it has to feel inherently satisfying.
Right. If the traversal is joyous, the tone of the game is sustained not by the story, but by the physical interface between the player and the controller.
That muscle memory we talked about at the very beginning.
Man, we have covered a tremendous amount of ground here today.
We really have.
We started by looking at just a purple mascot returning to the screen, but underneath that, we found a studio rewriting the rules of player agency with dynamic, physics-based flight.
The drone instead of the dart.
Right. And we saw how stripping away the rigid manufacturing deadlines of the plastic toy era allowed Toys for Bob to finally prioritize actual digital craftsmanship.
Escaping the cargo boats.
Exactly. Then we unpacked the complex demographic strategy required to satisfy 35-year-old nostalgia purists while delivering the fluid momentum demanded by today's 8-year-olds.
The Pixar tightrope.
And stepping back, we recognize the sheer audacity of an independent studio attempting to single-handedly correct the AAA industry's brightness deficit.
It is a multifaceted gamble that relies on absolutely flawless execution.
Yeah.
But if their thesis holds true, the implications for the wider industry are substantial.
I'm really curious where you think this leads if they succeed. Like, what happens if this actually works?
Well, consider the corporate reaction if Spyro, A Realm Beyond, dominates the sales charts in spring 2027.
Right.
If an independent studio proves that a massive, multi-generational audience is hungry for vibrant, optimistic escapism, it will shatter the assumption that AAA budgets require gritty realism.
Oh, wow.
You might see the major, publicly traded publishers suddenly scrambling to resurrect their own dormant, brightly colored franchises. A single, overwhelmingly successful release centered on love, joy, and laughter could force the entire industry to reevaluate the lucrative power of optimism.
It could spark a literal renaissance of color across the platform.
It really could.
We will see if the dragon can actually shift the tide. Thank you all for listening to this deep dive. As you go about your day, think about the media you're consuming. Are you gravitating toward the heavy and the cinematic, or are you secretly craving a bit of that unadulterated aerodynamic joy? We'll catch you on the next one.